I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Congratulations, we've made it to Friday, survived another week. We're starting the show in southeast Portland in the Lentz neighborhood. Not because something bad has happened, but because something good has happened. It's a community spirit and a determination to make things better for neighborhood kids. They've built this skate park for BMX bikes, RC cars, and yes, skateboarders. I first spotted the project at the end of January as I rode my bike along the Springwater Corridor Trail. It's at Southeast 100th and Duke. I was surprised to see a bunch of guys working to smooth concrete as they built a wall for a growing skate park. I stopped to ask who they are and met Alex Jenga. I interviewed him using my phone. He said, there's no company behind this project.
No, it's just a community group, loosely organized group of people that come together to clean this area up and make a safe place for kids to get some recreational activity through skateboarding, biking, you name it.
The germ of a park started here long ago at the end of a dead-end street. Someone built this tiny ramp on the edge of the sidewalk. It's really expanded since then. Portland has a proud tradition of do-it-yourself skate parks. One of the first and most famous is here under the Burnside Bridge. It was built 32 years ago. Back in Lentz, Alex told me the effort began as the pandemic hit and the world came to a stop.
People were bored, a lot of people were laid off out of work, and so people just started coming together.
He's a contractor and knows how to build things, and he was frustrated that there were no decent skate parks in his neighborhood.
There's one skate park way up over the hill on Mount Scott. That's you'd have to hike really far if you're a kid that doesn't have a driver's license, doesn't have a mom and dad are at work, you don't have a way to get there. That'd be really hard to get there. And then at Benedict, which is always really crowded off of Powell. And so this has kind of been a dead zone for skate parks. So the community took action into their own hands. And as you can see, there's people volunteering their time here to make a safe place for kids.
On a recent Friday, we found 9-year-old Max loving this place.
Like there's a bowl right here, there's going to be another one over there, and then there's another bowl. I mean, I like it because it's transition and bowl.
He likes that it's close.
You can walk here and, yeah, ride your bike and, ride your skateboard down, stop here and skate for a little bit.
His friend Kelly loves it too.
If there's one part that you can't skate, there's many other parts that you can. And it's really flowy.
The ramps are collectively called the Feral Cat Skate Park. It's not an official location that's approved by the Portland Parks Department, but with so many problems in outer southeast, from gun violence to issues with homelessness, the city doesn't seem too concerned about a neighborhood skate park. That's a good thing. Along with all the heartache brought by the pandemic, this appears to be one of those silver linings that's arrived as well. A bright spot for the community, built with the skill, sweat, and love of volunteers over the last 2 years. By the way, the work out there is not over. The volunteers will be out there again tomorrow around 11:30 or noon. If you feel like pitching in, the park's at Southeast 100th and Duke. Tell them I said hello. We do this show because we're obsessed with local news, and I know you care about local issues and local news as well. In fact, the word local is key. The big TV networks and the big news outlets like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, they do great work. But you're never going to get the same kind of story from a national outlet that you're going to get from a reporter who lives in the community they cover. We're affected by the same issues you are. We live in your neighborhoods. We have a vested interest in what's happening here, just like all local reporters do. So when a community loses local journalists, it is a big deal, especially in smaller towns that didn't have a lot of local news coverage to begin with. This week, the Herald and News in Klamath Falls lost its entire reporting staff. Now, it was only 4 people, the editor and 3 reporters, but they all left. And now there's no one to report the news for that paper. The Herald and News, by the way, is an excellent local news outlet. They've been covering Klamath Falls and the issues surrounding the Klamath Basin in Southern Oregon for years, and their staff had closer connections to what was happening there than probably anyone else in the state. And by the way, there is a lot happening there. Remember the water crisis in the Klamath Basin last summer? There wasn't enough water for all the users who needed it. That set off a major conflict with protests and standoffs and threats, and spoiler alert, that's still the state's worst drought area, and that conflict is not going away this year. We connected with the Herald and News several times for our own coverage of that conflict because they're the ones who've been working there every day, covering the ins and outs and knew all the players. Alex Schwartz was one of the reporters on the Herald and News coverage of that water crisis. He says he wants to keep working on it.
It was a really difficult decision for me because I really wanted to keep covering the Klamath, in this role. But I just knew that if I stayed, it was just going to be so much harder. And I was going to have so much other work put on my plate, and that the quality of everything that I was going to put out was probably going to suffer. And I didn't think that was fair to me or to any of our readers or to any of my sources. So I made the decision to leave.
That's a shame because he's an excellent reporter. So why are people leaving? For the Herald and News, there appear to be a lot of reasons. We're told part of it has to do with the paper's relationship with its parent company, their editorial decisions, and the workload journalists have. Another part of it, for journalists across the country, they feel they just aren't being paid enough money to actually live in the area they're covering. We took a look at the job posting for a reporter at the Herald and News earlier this week when the story broke. They were offering $14 to $20 an hour to the reporters, which is roughly $28,000 to $39,000 a year. Now they've upped it to $16 to $21 an hour. That's still $31,000 to $40,000 a year. So for people who have to pay rent, pay off student loans, pay for childcare, the costs do add up. The editor, the person in charge of the news department, wasn't making much more, starting at about $45,000 a year. And by the way, this is not restricted to small news outlets. There are journalists in big cities who can barely make ends meet as the cost of living rises. Those reporters quitting in the Klamath Basin leaves a bit of a news desert there. There are only one or two tiny one-person operations, and that's about it. The publisher of the Herald and News says they do plan to hire more journalists, but it's not easy to hit the ground running and produce the same level of coverage, especially when your entire staff is going to be brand new. And it is an important area.
There's like 70,000 people live in Klamath County. We also covered Lake County, Modoc County, and Siskiyou County in California. More people live there, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a majority rural area, but Klamath Falls is a city of, almost 50,000 people. And, it has its own government and cops and schools and all that stuff. And there's just not going to be anybody on that as a, objective reporter.
Now, none of us who do this job say we're in it for the money, because we're not. We do it because we love it and we think it's important. But according to a report from the University of North Carolina, the United States has lost approximately 60 daily and 1,800 weekly newspapers in the last 20 years. And according to the Bloomberg City Lab, cities where newspapers closed up shop saw an increase in government costs because of the lack of scrutiny over local deals. Now, there are digital newsrooms cropping up that don't have the same overhead as traditional newspapers, but more are needed. Journalists are the ones interviewing candidates, so you know who you're voting for, explaining laws and ballot issues that are sometimes intentionally misleading, debunking misinformation, and calling BS when leaders make claims that just don't hold up. It's our job to hold the government accountable to the community and to let people know what's going on. And when there aren't journalists to do that, you've got a situation ripe for government abuse, misinformation, and extremism. We talked about this with Les Zeitz. He's a legendary investigative reporter who spent years at the Oregonian newspaper and is now the publisher of another small local paper, the Malheur Enterprise, which covers Malheur County.
What we find with the Malheur Enterprise in Malheur County is that our readers really count on us to be the watchdog, to question government spending, to question decisions that public officials make. When we do tough stories, they're among the very best read stories that we do. And we are told constantly, keep it up, we're behind you. The challenge across Oregon, and it's also a challenge, frankly, in the profession across the country, is that the costs of providing journalism are going up. The ability to fund journalism is going down. And it makes it very, very difficult for news organizations to be able to attract talent. We would all like to pay really high wages. We can't. We would be out of business, and then there would be zero journalism in many of these communities. So it is a challenge for not only for news organizations, but for Oregon. Without these journalists, a lot of information, a lot of stories are not getting done. And that means people don't know important things that they should know.
So where do we go from here? Well, an easy answer: support your local journalism when you can. Subscribe to those small papers and to the Oregonian and all the others. But subscriptions aren't going to solve news deserts. Les Zaitz, who you just heard from there, mentioned that many traditional print outlets are turning to digital only, which does keep the cost down. And the Local Journalism Sustainability Act is making its way through Congress now. It would provide tax credits for newspaper subscriptions, provide payroll credits to employers, and provide tax credits to businesses who advertise in local media. That's good. We'll be keeping an eye on all of that. But in the meantime, we want to hear from you about your local news outlets and the impactful work you see them doing. Send us your thoughts or your favorite article to thestory@kgw.com. If you're looking for an obvious sign of climate change, look no further than the glaciers on our mountains.
Here on the left is an image from 1959, and here on the right an image from 2014.
And if they disappear completely, they could really mess up the ecosystem and water supply in the Pacific Northwest. When the story continues. Welcome back, and keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We love to have a conversation with you. You could also give us a call and leave a voicemail at 503-226-5090. I know sometimes our viewers in Washington think we don't pay enough attention to you. Well, tonight we're going to talk about your mountains. Washington State has more glaciers than any other state outside of Alaska, but they are shrinking, and in some instances they're disappearing altogether. Glenn Farley spoke with some experts who say this is a warning about what's happening to our planet.
Glaciers. They are another indicator of our changing climate. At more than 14,000 feet high, many of those glaciers are found here, high on Mount Rainier.
The entire mountain turns red. It's late summer and there's been melting. And when the entire mountain turns blue, that's when you have a lot of snowfall.
These top-down images taken by 2 satellites in stereo from 2014 through 2017. It allows scientists to quickly measure the glaciers on Mount Rainier. The images include 2015, a winter of record low snowpack. What shows up as black is rock.
Not just measuring the surface, but trying to understand why the surface is changing.
Assistant Professor David Sheen plays an important role in understanding our shrinking glaciers, but be careful about making assumptions about his role in climate change.
I'm not a climatologist, no, I'm a remote sensing expert.
So a lot of this glacier work is happening here on the campus of the University of Washington in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. From the University of Washington to the National Park Service, which for a century has documented changes in glaciers from Mount Rainier to the Olympics to North Cascades National Parks. This is Banded Glacier in the North Cascades in 1960. By 2016, it is largely reduced to a lake. This was Lillian Glacier in 1905 in the Olympic Mountains. By 2010, it's gone. Anderson Glacier also in the Olympics in 1936 and finally 2015. While scientists have been documenting the shrinking areas covered by glaciers in the 3 national parks for over a century, the rate of melt and loss has accelerated over the past 40 years. In Olympic National Park, 43% of what was there in the 1970s is gone by 2015. The North Cascades losing nearly 20%, most of that since 1977. Mount Rainier lost 14% since 1971, but consider that much of its glacial ice is at a much higher and colder altitude. Yet even there, lower-level glaciers have suffered more significant loss, say glaciologists with the National Park Service.
Here on the left is an image from 1959, and here on the right an image from 2014. And in 1958 or 59, you can see the glacier extended down to South Cascade Lake here.
Max Stevens is a glaciologist. He's with the U.S. Geological Survey, and one glacier in particular in the northern Cascades is a benchmark. Ironically, it's called the South Cascade Glacier.
So South Cascade Glacier is about twice the size of Green Lake, and it's about 650 feet thick, so that's more or less the height of the Space Needle. And each year we're taking about 2 feet off of the top of that.
In 2004, we loaned a small camera to scientists making their late summer visit. And this is the meltwater in a particularly bad year. South Cascade Glacier is one of 5 benchmark glaciers the agency has been closely studying, this one for over 60 years. 3 other glaciers are in Alaska, one is in Montana. But it's what's learned on these glaciers that tells a bigger story.
So here's a year that it had gained some mass, but on the whole, the mass has decreased.
But for the Geological Survey, they are also studying the inside of the glaciers, drilling holes, weighing ice, and setting up weather stations to get a year-round picture.
The glaciers are a big part of the water resources in the Northwest.
Scientists say there are 2 important aspects of glacial measurement: how long they are, the area covered, and how thick and heavy they are. Sheen is using drones along with satellites to map that all out with precision over a much wider number of glaciers.
So combining the LiDAR measurements, the laser measurements with the camera measurements will allow us to make the most detailed observations of our glaciers yet. We're measuring very precise changes in the glacier surface over time. And what we can do with that is we can take that information and figure out how much ice and snow exists in the system.
He can now even measure snow levels from old photos taken from airplanes.
We call this the digital glacier time machine.
In Washington, glaciers matter. On the Skagit River, glacial melt accounts for 12% of the river's flow. That cold water is critical for salmon, especially in the summer. It also helps generate electricity. Glaciers, part of our ecosystem, extending down from high up in the mountains, and they are in trouble.
Talking about climate warming and the changes it will bring can be downright depressing. There are now therapists who specialize in something called climate anxiety. We'll hear from one next week. Here's a question. How many of you know what a city auditor actually does? It might sound like a dull job to some, but it's a lot more interesting than you think. And the race for the next Portland City Auditor is contested for the first time since 1986. We'll talk to the candidates next. We've spent a lot of time talking about the Oregon governor's race, but there's a lot of other notable races happening that we don't want to overlook. For instance, in May, Portland voters will choose a new city auditor. Now, don't turn the channel just yet. I know it can sound boring to some of us, but it's actually a really important and super interesting job. You might be asking, what exactly does a city auditor do? Well, to put it simply, they are the city's independent watchdog with an eye out for waste and mismanagement. They're supposed to be impartial, so they don't answer to the city council or the mayor. Their office evaluates the performance of city bureaus and programs. They oversee city elections, including the city's public financing system for campaigns, and monitor lobbying activity before City Hall. Here's some examples that we've covered recently that involve the auditors. Last fall, the auditor's office released a report about Portland's property maintenance system. It lets anyone complain to the city about your property. That sounds fun, huh? They found more complaints happen in areas with higher populations of people of color, which leads to more fines from the city, and that's not fair. I spoke with a homeowner who got caught up in all this because his house needed repairs.
I kept on getting fines, and they kept on going up, and it was overwhelming for me, and so I couldn't keep it up. So I got up to $230,000.
How much?
$230,000.
Did you believe that number?
I didn't believe it at first, and then they said, they were going to foreclose on my house.
The good news is they did not, and a program came through and helped him. In December, the auditor's office released a report saying Portland is not prepared to meet the needs of people with disabilities during emergencies, including natural disasters. They said the city does not have plans in place to notify people with disabilities about the emergencies or even to make sure they can be evacuated. And then just last month, a new city audit found that Portland's approach to collecting taxes, fines, or fees can be inconsistent, confusing, even downright harmful. Check this out. Each bureau has its own way of collecting money, and some have used third-party debt collectors that tack on interest and fees to the unpaid bills. So you can see the auditor oversees a lot of important issues that affect a lot of people. But now you might be asking, well, okay, but how do I decide who to vote for Portland's next auditor? Good news, you're in the right place. There's two candidates running. Simone Reddy is a senior management auditor at Metro and used to be a staff auditor with the state of Oregon. Brian Setzler is a licensed certified public accountant who previously worked as an auditor for two international accounting firms and for Washington's Department of Revenue. That's Washington State. Laurel Porter talked to both of them on Straight Talk this week about what their priorities would be.
I would really bring a risk-based approach to selecting topics for audit. That means choosing topics that are posing the highest risk to the public's health and safety, as well as considering the financial risks and risks to complying with laws and regulations. I would also consider issues that are of concern to city employees and the public. Those would be issues that you mentioned, such as the homelessness crisis in Portland. That seems to be the most pressing issue facing our community. And that's one that some local audit shops, including the Metro Auditor and the city and county auditor, have already looked into. So I'd want to continue that work.
First thing I would do to get into the office is to really speak to the staff to see what ideas and what we can carry forward. Like Simone, I too would bring a risk-based approach. One of the ideas I have is to use a decision matrix to help make the decisions of what we're auditing transparent and to show the criteria of how we're choosing what we audit.
Very interesting, by the way. Sorry, Simone, for mispronouncing your name. Please don't audit me. You can watch their full interviews on Straight Talk. That's coming up tonight at 7. The spotlight is often on Portland when it comes to the homeless crisis, but small towns across the state are dealing with similar issues. That's why this week's Hey Help campaign is highlighting the Forest Grove Foundation. It's a super cool group. They aim to help distribute food, supplies, and clothes to homeless individuals around western Washington County. If you want to help, just scan the QR code on your screen now or go to kgw.com/heyhelp. And remember, this is a micro donation drive. You don't have to give a lot of money. You can send as little as just a few bucks, but more if you'd like. They'd like that too. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to the story at kgw.com. When we come back, we'll finish with a little good news. Did you see that hospitalizations for COVID in Oregon are dropping like a rock? We hit 375 statewide today. That's below the 400 the governor said would be used to decide when the mask mandate could be dropped. Now, it hasn't been dropped yet. It's actually in place until next weekend. But I want to hear from you. Are you ready to get rid of your mask indoors, or have you already done that? What's it feel like? Also, let me know if you're worried about that and tell me why. Are you immune compromised, or do you have loved ones who are? Or is it just psychologically kind of hard to think about getting rid of them after all this time? Please send me an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. Our phone number is 503-226-5090. We'll air some of your responses on Monday. It's Friday, so let's go out with some good news. We know there's a lot more good happening in the world than bad. Here's a man who feeds his mind every day, works on being present and not judging others.
I'm happy because I have a family that loves me, I've got a great job, and I got a great community that supports me. And I think that if we really think about it, that's all we really need. Money is a byproduct. Everything else is substance.
Yes, indeed. Well said, sir. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, that never ends. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.